Okay, how are you doing? So welcome to another event with Dublin Coding School. Today we're actually going to be joined by our partner Ingenio, and we're going to be looking at advice for you on your CV, your interview techniques, and a few tricks from one of the leading tech recruiters in Ireland about what you might do if you're looking to change careers, and then apply to places. But what the things you need to do to prepare for that. So we're delighted to have them here today. We'll talk a bit about the partnership and all of that a bit later, but I'd like to first of all introduce them. So first up, it's the founder and CEO of Ingenio, Rob Magee. Rob, how are you doing?
Luke, good afternoon. Great to be with you.
Great, thank you very much. And we also have Jack Matthews here, who's also the head of their software engineering practice, technology practice. Hi, Jack, how are you doing?
Hey, Luke. Yeah, very well, thank you. And looking forward to today's session, first of many, hopefully.
Brilliant. Yes, so thank you. So look, also, by the way, now, if you're watching along with us here on Facebook, just type, if you have any questions, type them in below and we'll get to all the questions at the end. And also, if you're watching the recording, we'll be giving you details of how to contact us at the end. So if you do have any questions, just pop an email to one of us and we'll certainly get straight back to you. So I'd like to just to kick off here by throwing it to you guys. So we had some topics pre-arranged, so we're just maybe work our way through them. But I know that one of them was the biggest mistakes job seekers are making and how to avoid them. So there's probably a lot of people watching this saying, I'm seeking a job in tech right now. Am I making mistakes? What are they? So I'll throw it over to you guys. Who'd like to field that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I can. So I guess just to give a bit more context, I mean, I head up the software engineering and technology practice within Ingenio. So situated in Dublin, but my team and I, we work with clients across the UK and Ireland and also further afield on the continent in Europe too. So I've been recruiting in that tech dev space now for just over 10 years. Like to think that the team and I are experienced and we know what we're doing. So yeah, any insight today that we can offer to help your audience is wonderful. And I guess in terms of that first question there, the biggest mistakes job seekers are making, in my experience, what I sense candidates struggle with when they're applying for new roles is having a clear job search strategy aligned to their career and the types of roles that they are trying to secure. So when I speak to candidates, we may find that candidates are often they'll see a job perhaps on a job board, or they'll get a notification through for a role which suits their background and skill set, and they'll apply to it. But I think it's really key, if you are going to even dip your toe into the market and see what other opportunities are out there, I firmly believe it's important to have a really clear job search strategy in place. And the things I'd be looking to do would be to partner specifically with a recruitment company that's specialized within the area that the candidate operates in. If I was the candidate, I'd be doing my due diligence on that. So I'd be asking for references. I'd be, in an ideal world, you'd be possibly going to meet the recruiter, go for a coffee with the recruiter now that we're coming out of COVID and stuff like that. And I'd do my due diligence on that front, and I'd be making sure that within my job search strategy, once every fortnight or so, I'd be in contact with the recruiters that really do specialize within the field that I operate in as a candidate, just to see what new opportunities are coming out there within the marketplace. And also to be posing questions to the recruiter, is there anything the candidate can do in order to get an edge on the competition to ensure that they are transitioning from application through to interview?
Yeah, Luke, can I come in there?
Absolutely.
I think Jack has given Jack's given a pretty broad, kind of a pretty broad overview there, and actually some really, really interesting kind of specifics. I think, from a personal perspective, right? So when I started Ingenio 7 and a bit years ago as a recruitment agency, if you like, I just sold the technology business and started this business. And one of the key drivers for me starting the business was to, I had seen as a client from a hiring perspective just how poor some of the kind of engagement and process and connect was. And look, clearly, like every business, when you start it, you think you can do things a little bit better, right? And that was definitely one of my mantras around kind of starting Ingenio. Last year, when COVID, when the pandemic hit, obviously, like every single recruitment business anywhere in the world, like our business literally ground to a halt overnight. And look, we were quite lucky in the sense that we served the SaaS software and tech space, which recovered very quickly. But we still had a kind of a relatively fallow kind of 3 or 4 months, where there was zero job flow, zero clients. But actually what we had hundreds and thousands of candidates coming to us and applying for every single type of job that was out there. It could have been like the anecdote story I tell was, 4 weeks after the pandemic, we had a junior project manager role paying about 35,000 euros as a basic salary. And we would typically expect to get 20, 25, 30 job applications for that. We got 2,000 job applications in 48 hours. Yeah, like staggering, right? So what we ended up doing as a result of seeing the kind of job market fragment and shift from being a candidate market to being a client market, and by the way, it's gone back to a candidate market already, which is again almost staggering to kind of hear, but it's really good for your listeners to understand that.
Yeah.
But we had all these people arrive into the job market looking for jobs in tech, right? So it wasn't just the people who had qualifications in tech or had aspirations to work in tech. It was, it was bartenders, it was waiters, it was people working in airlines, it was like, you name it, everyone arrived into this space. So look, the big thing for me was we fired up a business called Ingenio Learning last year to deal with that kind of shift. And since we've been doing it now, we launched it last October, and there's a load of things that we've seen, in terms of, going back to your question, there's a load of things that we've seen in terms of mistakes. Yeah. I call it the proposition or your shop window, right? So what does Rob Magee look like to the outside world? Is it clear that he's a junior software developer? Yeah. If it isn't, your shop window is not working correctly. So it's getting people to really think about what they look like to the people who are going to be looking at their CVs, resumes, interviewing them, potentially hiring them, whatever the case may be. So that's shop. If I keep doing this, right? Because it's like, it's like looking into a shop window.
But it's a good analogy. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. If you walk by a butcher shop, you know exactly what the guy sells, right? Because it's in the window. And I think the crucial thing is making sure that people, whether you're starting off or whether you're very experienced, it's really, really important on that side of things. The second thing I would say in terms of mistakes is people really mess up the whole job application process. And they do it lots of different ways. There may be serial applicants, which is definitely not a good thing, right? Yep. So applying for loads of different jobs in the same business, and that gets flagged using software. Yeah. There's things like, making fundamental errors in terms of your application. You know what I mean? Not doing what the instructions very clearly state you to go and do. There is, applying for jobs that you're just simply not. Yes, you'd love to do them, but you don't have the experience. So like, don't go there. You know what I mean? Because you're just not going to be considered, and you're damaging your digital reputation. Is my, really kind of important one on that. For me, and listen, I'm a sales guy by trade, right? So this is kind of a little bit easier to me than maybe your audience today. Yeah. But it is staggering to Jack and I how many applicants or candidates don't bother following up an application that they've made. And if they do follow it up, they do it on email, which is going to get digitally lost. Yeah. Pick up the phone, record a video, get your proposition, your shop window into the hiring manager in front of you, and look, again, knowing your audience, Luke, today, you need to treat this whole process just like a project, just like a software development project, right? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, and there's an outcome, and maybe the outcome is a little bit fluffy and woolly and not that well defined, but it's really, really important that you treat all components of that process just like a project, And where you're good and strong, then you don't need help. Where you've got weaknesses and gaps, you need to go and get help wherever you're going to get that help from.
Right. Okay. So that's really good advice. So there's some of the things you might be doing wrong, so you can look out for those trapdoors now.
Yeah.
Well, probably, and I suppose we were talking about it, very interesting. You brought up the process there. So there's very much the beginning, the middle, and an end. And I suppose at the beginning of that process is probably, I know some people dread this, is writing the old CV. So they have to dust it down, and there can be a lot of, I know a lot of people and students in the school are always saying like, well, what should be in my CV? Can you have any advice about that? And it can be quite daunting for some people to write a CV and know what is best practice. So maybe we'll come to that topic next. So I suppose it's, what would be your advice for writing kind of a winning CV?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take that one. So I think when I review a CV, personally, I like the CV to be 2 pages long. I think that in today's market is enough there if you can cover 2 pages in terms of your history and your skill set. But first and foremost, contact details, full name, location. So just get those details correct and make sure they're towards the top of the CV. That's really important. If you're a software developer, I would be referring to my URL links on LinkedIn, and if you've got a GitHub account with some of your work on GitHub in terms of your own portfolio, I'd make sure that they're visible towards the top of the CV as well. I'd then probably go into a bit of a personal profile aspect before we get into career history, and I'd just make that 1 paragraph long, and I would just pretty much sum up who you are and what your core expertise are, whether that is in the world of software development. You could be a really good front-end developer, but I would just try and clarify to the recruiter, to the person who's reading the profile, what your core expertise are, and why you're an SME within that field. So I'd look at that and then go straight into career history, where you work, of course, job title, employment dates, maybe a 1-line synopsis around the company or the industry that you work in, a few bullet points with regards to your key responsibilities within the role. And what I really like to see on the CV is just 1 or 2 bullet points underneath achievements, which covers off what you've been responsible for, but really what you've succeeded in whilst working in that particular role, and what were the biggest achievements to date whilst in that job. So I would then go down and break, some candidates, they may have had several roles over the last 10 years. So do that for each role. And then underneath the career history, keep it very, you don't need to think too much. It's just a CV. So it's just really highlighting what your expertise are in your career history. I'd then probably go into a bit of a skills matrix towards the underneath career history, which purely covers off the key technology that you work with, and what your strength is. So, some CVs that I see, candidates now are rating themselves between 1 and 5, 1 and 10, for instance, how strong they are on different tech languages from a developer perspective. So I think that's really important. I'd look at doing something like that. And then, of course, underneath that, just references, 2 references, could be character references, or, references are available upon request, but make sure when you're putting that CV, that document together, you are going off on your own accord to try and get those references in place. So when the time comes in that process, when you're applying for a role, 95% of jobs that you apply for these days, you won't transition from a verbal offer into a written offer until references are raised and sent over to the employer. So I definitely have those in place. But if we're focusing purely on a developer CV, get your GitHub portfolio, get your link in the CV, because that gives the hiring manager an opportunity to see how you work and the type of developer you are, and they can then look at some of the previous projects you've worked on through the GitHub account. I think developers in today's market, if you haven't got a GitHub account, it's a massive fail, really. It's a bit of a red flag, because You are competing with so many other candidates that will have their work on GitHub. So the hiring manager can clearly see what types of projects you've been involved in the past and where your strengths may lie. So they can benchmark it against the actual job that I guess you've applied for.
And just for the benefit of people might be watching, and some of them will, but some of them mightn't know what you mean by GitHub. So maybe just explain what that is briefly.
Yeah, so GitHub is just an online community where you can upload some of your work from a software development perspective. It could even be in data science, and it's just like it's a social media account, so to speak, where you can create your own profile and some of the previous projects that you may have done during work or outside of work. You can upload that project work onto GitHub, and it gives the hiring manager an opportunity, just really, as I say, to get an idea around what your experience is and the types of projects you've been involved in the past. And as I say, most developers would know what GitHub is, but it's a really useful one in that dev space in particular, because if I'm the recruiter, or if I'm engaging with the hiring manager and we've got a briefing call to maybe go through 3 or 4 profiles together, we will both spend time on that briefing call referring to GitHub just to see the type of work they've done in the past and why that might be relevant to the role they're applying for.
Yeah, very good. It's just because some of the people will be changing careers, they'll be having a look. And actually on our courses, especially the full stack web development one, they are building their own websites, front end and back end. We're advising them to put those on GitHub afterwards. So it's like a kickstart on their portfolio. Sorry, Absolutely. Rob, are you going to mention something?
Luke, I was just going to say to you actually, so Jack and I, when we were kind of thinking about today, we thought what we might do was maybe, like, rather than just talk about it, let's show you what we're kind of talking about. Are you okay if I show a profile?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
So look, I think the chap whose profile, hopefully you can see my screen, but Javi is a candidate that we worked with a couple of years ago. And I mean, look, quite interestingly hopefully to your audience, right? Like, this guy is a hardcore, he's a developer turned into a kind of a head of engineering. Based in Barcelona. By the way, his contact details, Jack, all of the pieces that Jack has basically been kind of talking about, we've obviously taken out his contact details for obvious reasons, and we're sharing his profile obviously with his permission. But look, what I think is really interesting here, based on what Jack has just said around the kind of literally the breakdown of what the CV looks like. With this guy, he wants to work he was only interested in working in the creative and digital space, right? So you can see that his photograph with his very cool glasses and an exceptionally cool haircut is very relevant and appropriate to the area that he wants to go and work in. Now, very clearly, if he wanted to go and work for a large US headquartered bank or one of the big 4 accountancy companies, then clearly his shop window proposition would have to be very different. So again, I want to just try and get your guys tuned into that, right? But look, everything that Jack has basically said, right? His LinkedIn profile is in there. It's clickable, as opposed to someone having to go and cut and paste and then, make it easy for how you want to go and review it. His experience, we're able to click on BMAT and see who BMAT are. Because perhaps someone doesn't know the business that you've worked for previously, and they want to say, okay, well, he was head of recurring IT at BMAT, but I've no idea who BMAT are. So stuff, hyperlinks.
So you're making it very easy for the hiring manager there to find out.
Completely, absolutely. And for this guy, and again, the reason that we use this CV so much in terms of showing people is that, like, he's taken a slightly different view, because education to him is massively important, because he invested a huge amount of money in his MBA, and he's also a part-time lecturer. So education, bang up the top, because it's really important to him. Jack has mentioned skills down here on the right-hand side. Again, the skill set that if a recruiter was going to look for Javi to run a software development team where the core platform and language is maybe Ruby and Python, then obviously the skill sets need to be in here. There's a lot of detail. I mean, listen, Jack and I might argue about, is there too much words in here? Is there a bit too much information? But it's a bloody good story all the same.
Yeah.
And it tells you lots in terms of that. His achievements are brilliant because he starts to connect a little bit of work with personality. And for me, Luke, this is the thing that kind of blows our mind with this CV profile, right? Is that Javi knew exactly who was going to hire him. Okay. Right. He knew that it was probably a male. Okay. And the reason for that is that the vast majority of based on his own research, the vast majority of people who were leading IT and dev functions in the European digital and creative space were male. And he was saying, okay, well, look, I'm going to be speaking to a guy. He's going to be somewhere between the ages of 38 and 55. Yeah. And actually, I want to see what resonates with them. And he started talking about his favorite films and books. So that, again, this drops in and it's telling a story and it's almost creating a kind of a relationship before there's been any form of engagement. So again, very, very clever in terms of obviously how to construct the piece. And then lastly, look, you know, language being multilingual was again super important to the job that he was going to do, given the industry that he was working in, because it was a combo of Spanish and English. But lastly, look at the hobbies, right? I mean, you know, like E is get more tattoos. You know, D is watch beers with my friends watching Barcelona games. So like, by the time I've got to the bottom of this CV, 2 pages, by the way. Yeah. Like, I think I've got a really strong sense of Javi's character, of his individuality. I've got a pretty good sense that, like, you know, from a work experience, he's done all of the things that I would want to go and do. But now I'm really interested to have a conversation with him as a recruiter, because he just sounds like a pretty cool guy, right? Yeah. And look, that is the shop window proposition sucked into the CV and showing you what a Trojan horse that can be to get through that initial screen by, let's say, for example, a recruiter or whoever.
Yeah. And I suppose that point you made is even his picture was targeted at the types of people. As you said, if he was applying for a bank, he probably wouldn't put the films or that picture in, but because he's applying for quite a cool area, it's creative, and that they're the people would that be right? So you wouldn't always put your favorite films or books into a CV, I'd imagine.
No, not at all. And again, you know, look, one of the things that Jack and I will say, you know, your CV needs to be individual for every single application that you make, because what the client is looking for in every instance is a little bit different. So just because you're applying for junior software developer roles, what they want on the far side is very different. And again, a job description from a tech and software firm will be wildly different. Let's say, for example, for working for the government in, let's say, the Department of Health or Education. You know what I mean? It's chalk and cheese.
So people should be really looking at their CV each time, not just, but each time, and rewriting them. So I suppose it's probably different if you're applying for a startup or an enterprise in a large or that
completely. Completely.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, we'll just quick. Is there anything else on CVs you'd like to mention before we move on? Because we had another question we were going to go to.
Just on the CV, I also believe it's important candidates, you know, particularly if they're applying for a permanent job, it can be slightly different on the contract consulting market, but specifically on perm, I do really appreciate the candidate who takes the time and goes to the effort of potentially creating a cover letter to go alongside their CV, and just to give a further insight into why they're interested in the job and the company that the job is with. I do find that candidates that produce a cover letter only has to be 2 or 3 paragraphs long, no more than 1 page of A4. But typically they do progress further in the interview recruitment process, because straight away off the bat, they've been able to give a really clear answer into why they're interested in not only the job, as I say, but the company. And I think that's really important on the perm market, because you've got to really factor in being the right cultural fit to their organization too. And I do believe that hiring managers do appreciate it if the candidate is willing to take the time and produce a cover letter for each role that they apply to. I think that's key. And I would highly recommend the candidates that I tend to deal with, if it's a permanent role, I do ask them at the point where I'm sharing the full documentation, the brief, a link to the client's website, a link to the hiring manager, they can start to become more familiar with who this organization is and the role. They'll do their own due diligence. That might be over 2 or 3 evenings. They'll come back to me in the week and they'll say, look, I've looked into it. I've done my own research. I really like the sound of the job. The company seemed fantastic. And at that point, hopefully the candidate would have prepared a brief covering letter to assist in terms of going along with their CV that we then share with the hiring managers. And I do believe it goes a long way. So any candidates that are listening in there, I would highly recommend the CV alongside a cover letter as part of your job application strategy, definitely.
Okay, so I suppose it shows you're kind of giving that little bit of extra mile, isn't it, to maybe stand out more than another candidate who's just sent the CV.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, it will go on to some of the other topics we're going to be discussed, but why me? Why am I interested in you as the employer? And I think the hiring manager early on in any interview process, they want to get an idea from me as the recruiter. They want me to have qualified the candidate to ensure that they're the right fit culturally. They'll be a good asset to the team. And I think the cover letter does go a long way because it answers some of those questions and gives us an insight into why that candidate is clearly interested in applying for that job with one of our particular clients. Okay,
great. Well, look, that kind of segues nicely into the next question. So they've written their killer CV and it's all fitting right, and they've put it in, and then they get called for an interview, and then so you know that can also be the next daunting part of the process for a lot of people, and some people kind of do get very nervous, don't they, about interviews and maybe don't perform as well or don't represent themselves. So the next one was really about winning answers to questions. So what are the best answers to put to common questions in interviews?
Well, look, I think on that front, I think it's important, and Rob and I have done a similar one of these webinars before, but we spoke about transparency and honesty, and that's crucial at the beginning of any process where you're the candidate and it's your opportunity really to meet with the client for the first time. That initial telephone interview or that Zoom screening before you enter into more of a panel-based interview process, the client, the hiring manager, does want to get an idea around the candidate and their background and what their situation is in life really at this moment in time. So in that 30-minute call, I'd just be really transparent and look, if the reasons are that you don't feel challenged enough in your current role, there isn't opportunities for progression, you feel as though you've hit a bit of a ceiling, just make that very clear to the hiring manager so they know what your situation is and what are your reasons for being interested in joining them. So yeah, I think winning answers to common interview questions, they're gonna vary dependent upon the candidate and their situation, of course. But what I always recommend and advise my candidates is just to remain complete transparent throughout the entire process and just give them a true insight into the factors around why you are interested in the role.
Yeah, I think to maybe come in on a few things there, I think Jack's absolutely right, Luke. You know, clearly it's quite hard for us here in this instance, you know what I mean, to kind of almost pre-coach around all the various different kind of questions that come up. But if you think about some of the kind of the important things, I mean, Jack's already spoken about transparency and honesty and being calm. Look, the other thing is that it's always really good to have a little bit of empathy for the interviewer, despite the fact that you're breaking it yourself, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, this individual has called you to an interview. They've invited you to an interview, not for any other reason that they want to hire you. You know what I mean? Like, and it's really important. Like people who get called to interview, they're already successful. They've already got through a gate, you know what I mean, or over a threshold or whatever the case may be. So that's really important. The second thing is that the interviewer wants to They want to learn about you. They want to figure out, can you do the job?
Yeah.
Do you have the experience? Are you going to be a cultural fit? You know, will you connect in with the team? And so on and so forth, right? So whatever question it is that you're asked, like, give a bloody answer, right? And make sure it's not one-line stuff that's going to make the interviewer feel really uncomfortable, so that they have to maybe start thinking about their next question as they've just finished their first question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So listen, like, this comes back to, you know, a little bit of human psychology. If you and I were having a conversation in a coffee shop, it's a naturally flowing question and answer, observation, answer, question. So you've got to make sure that you participate in an interview that feels a little natural, despite the fact that you're going to be nervous. And look, maybe the interview is going to be nervous as well. They might not be a good interviewer. So I think, look, that's one of the things I would say to you. I am a huge believer in, if you feel or think you are weak in maybe an area of the job description, I would lead with that.
Yeah.
If you are in control of the narrative around your weaknesses or your lack of experiences, it means then that you're not going to get a question that puts you on the back foot.
Yeah.
You
avoid the gotcha moment or the.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, like, if you think about that going into an interview, you know, you will probably, hopefully, you know, you'll be doing a little bit of a SWOT, right? That's strengths, weaknesses, you know, kind of analysis in terms of the job description. Where have I done that? Where have I not done that? And I would be talking about maybe some of those perceived weaknesses, and talking about maybe how you're going to turn those weaknesses into strengths, you know what I mean? Or what you've already done to maybe minimize the impact of those as perceived weaknesses. So I think that's probably pretty important, you know, in terms of some of the questions that you're going to, you know, in terms of some of the questions that you're going to get asked.
Yeah, very good advice there. Staying in control of it and having a bit of a strategy around that. And actually, you mentioned an acronym there, and another acronym actually came up in what we were going to discuss today, which was the STAR method, STAR. So maybe I'd like to ask you, so what is the STAR method, and how can candidates who might be watching this utilize it?
Can I, you okay for me to share this?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Just again, just to give some real kind of context, right? So
yeah, brilliant.
So the STAR method, just to explain what it is, the STAR method is it's an acronym to help you deal with maybe, you know, a tell me about a time situational question that comes up in interviews all the time, right? So, you know, we do something on the Ingenio Learning course, you know, where we're talking about, like, what are the kind of 10 typical, you know, situational types of conversations that are most asked, right? You need to be ready for them, right? Tell me about a time when you were stressed. Tell me about a time when you're up against a deadline. Tell me about a time when you had a difficult colleague to work with. Tell me about a time when you were most proud. You know, all these types of scenarios, Luke, they're relatively easy to prepare for. But what STAR allows you to do is it gives you a process around how to answer those questions. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. And actually, the really interesting thing that we kind of extend on to the STAR technique is we also want to try and add in a bit, which is like, here was the result, but actually here's what I learned from being in that situation. I put an example together, right? So you know, you're asked this, you know, potentially kind of challenging question, right? And again, it's a bit of a role play scenario, right? So you're interviewing for, in this instance, a project manager or business analyst type role. And the interviewer says to you, Rob, tell me about a time when you recently handled, you know, a conflict or a stressful situation at work. So I then talk about the situation, right? So what am I doing in the situation? I'm telling the story. And I'm completely cool with that, because I was in that situation, right? So I'm telling the story. So in this instance, You know, there was a crisis, a CRM project that was off scope. The client was going mental. The budget was off the rails. We were about to get thrown off the job. And so what did I do? So basically, I got dropped into that project, and my task was, in the first 24 hours, I had conversations with every single stakeholder, and I introduced a layer of calm and peacefulness and tranquility that hadn't been in the project thus far. And as a result of those interviews with the stakeholders, I very quickly realized that actually all of the conflict in the issue was because the client and the vendor PMs, they hated each other. They didn't get on. They couldn't communicate. So basically what I did, my action, was that I changed the resources and I changed the communications plan. And as a result of that, we got the project back on track. And look, before I jumped in, it was going to be 3 months delay. There was still a delay, right? So it still wasn't a good outcome for the client. Back to Jack's honesty piece.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as bad as what it could have ended up being. And for me, the lesson that I learned from that whole experience by being involved in that experience was, like, if your gut or your spidey senses are telling you that there's an issue in terms of communication, you need to get on it and sound the alarm bells before it turns into a crisis situation like that. So you see that by deconstructing, by deconstructing that question and preparing using the STAR method, you can see then that you've got a really nice, comfortable structure to be able to go through, at the beginning, the middle, and the end of that story.
Yeah. That's great. So it's a real array of structuring your answers and your stories, so you can almost have these ready and you can structure them beforehand, and that's really good.
Completely, yeah.
By the way, I'm just going to quickly, we've actually had a question come through from the chat, so we might just address this now before moving on to our next topic. And it's from Alexander, who has asked, okay, well, it's actually asked a couple of questions. The first one is, what should be contained in a cover letter? So obviously he was listening to you, Jack, and just had a question. What would be the kind of main key points that you'd put in a cover letter, was the first question.
Yeah, so the key breakdown of a cover letter, in my opinion, I think it should include, so first and foremost, let's just go into what they are as a candidate. So if they're a software developer with X amount of years experience in development.
Sorry, I'll also just say, by the way, Alexander has said that he's data analytics is his background in computer science.
Fantastic. So you may want to refer to your education initially in terms of your data analytics background and whether you've studied that in university, and if so, what was the result of those studies. I'd also include a bit of an insight into what they're doing right now in their career history to date. So it's not like a CV where you're covering all the responsibilities, but it's just giving a little flavor around what you do as a data analytics engineer, for instance, and who you work for. I'd refer to the job description that you've applied to, and I'd point out the key responsibilities and expectations of that person in the role. And I'd maybe try and tackle a few of those in the cover letter by explaining why you think you're a good fit for the role based upon your experience to date. And then beyond that, I'd also, last paragraph, why you're interested in that particular company. What is it that resonates with you in terms of their values and their culture? Do you know, potentially it could be that you've got peers or ex-peers that are working for that company. You've heard speaking to them that it's a great place to work. So maybe refer to some of that in there, but do your research and make sure you've got some really valid reasons for why you'd be really keen to join that particular company that you've applied to. I think that's important. It helps you, as I say, as a candidate, stand out compared to your competition, because you've gone to that level of effort really to explain in a one-page document why you're a good fit and why you think you'll add value in that role to the hiring manager. So should hopefully, along with the CV, all of that combined should get you through to an opportunity where you can perform an interview.
Great. Thank you very much. I hope that helps, Alexander. And if you have, or if anyone else watching has any more questions, just type them in and we will get to them. So the next thing we were going to mention, I don't know if we just touched on there, was conflict questions. Was the next topic, and it was conflict interview questions and answers. I don't know, we sort of touched on it there, but was that something you wanted to also mention? Oh, you're just on mute there, Rob. So
here I am talking to myself,
yeah.
as usual, by the way. Nothing new there. Yeah, look, I think in terms of the conflict piece, Luke, you know, the best way I can kind of help people get ready for that, right, is first understanding what type of question. And again, you hear me speak about this a lot, about being empathetic. So why is someone asking you about a time when you had a pretty crappy experience in work? Okay. And the reason they're asking you that question is because, number one, it's a behavioral question. Okay.
Yeah.
And they want to see and learn and understand. They want to see what you're like from a personality perspective. And they want to understand how you would deal with those types of situations, not if, but when they arise in this new place of employment that you're interviewing for. It's really, really important. So look, what I would try and do, like in terms of maybe helping people, like, so if you think about it, I've given a couple of examples earlier on, right? I would be kind of thinking about things like maybe when you had a personal clash with someone. Personality clash happens all the time. Like, it happens all the time in every business. So like, don't be afraid to talk about that. Maybe another thing that creates a lot of conflict is maybe a lack of resource, you know? So we had a job to do and the team should have been 10 men, but actually 8, you know, 2 of the guys were off on their holidays and on their jollies, or not pulling their weight, or whatever the case may be. And how did we get around that issue? Typically a lot of conflict comes from really poor communication, you know what I mean, between either two individuals or 2 teams or 2 bodies, or whatever the case may be, or indeed that there's a real straightforward difference of opinion. So if you think about it, what I would be doing is I would be trying to think about something conflict, right? So conflict is those examples I've given you, right? So a clash, a lack of resource, poor communications, or a difference of opinion, and use the STAR method, you know, use the situation, task, action, result, and learning from each one. And by the way, it's really important to pull the learning piece in here, because that's really what shows you have a level of maturity and reflectiveness and insight, that you've been able to go, you know what, look, like, Luke and I just didn't get on, and look, you know, I recognize that that's probably going to happen again, because we're going to work together and we're in 2 teams that are dependent on each other. So look, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to bring my personality clash into a meeting with Luke. I know he's going to wind me up, or I know he's going to communicate with me this way, and I'm just going to stay very calm and passive, and I'm just going to, you know, we're going to talk and we're going to keep things to the agenda. So things like that really bring a real level of maturity to your answer. And I think when people kind of, you know, when they can see that, you know, they kind of say, okay, right, well, look, you know, this guy, number one, he's been searingly honest. Number two, you know, he has a good structured way of actually organizing and answering and behaving himself.
Yeah, and it's showing a maturity. I suppose those questions, they can kind of sometimes scare people, because they think, oh, I'm going to mention something that puts me in a bad light. But what you're saying is they should view them as an opportunity, and maybe by using this STAR method, that they can sort of structure the story in a way that shows that.
Big time. I mean, ultimately, when we get to the end of that answer, you know, when we get to the end of the answer, like the project manager example I used there, you know, you kind of want to be almost collegiate with your interviewer, and the interviewer's going, God, like I get that. In fact, I had that exact same issue on our last program, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, tell me how did that manifest itself? How did you? And then you've almost flipped the interview back, and you're in a little bit of control. Now, look, again, you probably need a bit of experience to be able to do that, but again, it goes back to a natural flowed conversation and interview, as opposed to it being rigid. Here's my question, and here's the answer.
Here's the answer. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's really good. So this moves us on to the next topic very well. So, there's always that moment in an interview where the questions stop and they say to you, have you got any questions for us? And we just really, I suppose some people think, well, what will I ask here? So what are the kind of do's and don'ts, questions you should ask, questions you shouldn't, or really good ones that you could have prepared for that?
Yeah, there's I'd say there's 2 or 3 that when I'm in conversation with my candidates and we're going through interview preparation, there's 1 or 2 that I always refer to and encourage the candidate to pose in their interview with the hiring manager. So first and foremost, the opportunity to ask questions is there, and it allows you to better understand the position and the company and whether that company is a right fit for you as a candidate. And it also is an opportunity for the candidate to demonstrate their interest in the position and try and stand out compared to some of the other candidates that are in the interview process. But a key question that I fundamentally think that, well, I try to ask all my candidates to pose this to the interviewer. I tend to sort of bring it back to the interviewer and ask them, what do they like about working for this company? I think that's a key question. And it gives the candidate an opportunity to really understand from the hiring manager's perspective what makes it a good company and why do they enjoy going to work for that company on a full-time basis, most likely. So I think that's a good one because it's a bit of an eye-opener into the culture, and then the interviewer has to think and give an insight into the things that they enjoy about working there. So I'd definitely be posing that question. Another key question that I think goes down well with the interviewer is what kind of person tends to succeed in the company, and what kind of person would tend to struggle within the business too. So I'm sure the hiring manager there could give 1 or 2 stories around success stories where they possibly employ people in the past in that team, and why was that person a good fit? What were their key attributes and characteristics that made them a good fit for not only the role, but for the business and for the team? And likewise, also try and get an understanding around what were the key characteristics of those candidates that possibly didn't perform as well within the role and didn't quite work out the way it was hoped. So I'd certainly be posing that question. I think it's really important as well to try and find out, is this a new position? So in the interview process, if so, why is this new role being created? If not, why did the last person leave the role? So if it's a replacement for somebody that's left, try and get an idea around from why did that last person leave the organization, and the interviewer should have that information really from the exit interview. But likewise, if it's a newly created role, why are the business investing money into that particular area? And that's a key question to be posing, because I mean, if I'm a candidate and if I'm a good software developer, I want to get an insight from the hiring manager around what the next 12, 24, 36 months looks like within that function. What's the latest tech that they're going to be working with? What's that IT strategy and what's that roadmap that's being created? Can the interviewer give any further information to where the business are trying to go, whether they've got growth plans, as I say, tech, what's the reason for that investment? So I'm hopeful there's 1 or 2 questions that I think go down really well with an interviewer. One, in terms of why do they like working there, which really defines what the culture is. 2, could you describe to me what type of candidate or character does well working for this business, and likewise candidates that struggle? Because then really you from that you can gather, do you have enough synergies there in terms of your characteristics as a candidate and you think you'd be a good fit for them? And then finally, try and open up into the bigger picture. What are the plans for the next sort of 3 to 5 years of that technology department? And how can you come in and add value, not only immediately, but also over the next 3 or 4 years, just so you can see and you can try to paint a bit of a picture in your mind around where the opportunities might lead to in terms of progression and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, some really good ones there. I like that. Is it a new role? That's a good one I hadn't heard before. But Rob, did you have something to add?
I might just, again, listening, just with your audience in mind, what Jack is talking about there, right, is the questions that you absolutely need to ask. They have to be positive, and they have to be curious, right?
Yeah.
And the psychology here behind a positive, curious question is one that, you know, thinks about things like success and pride, you know, and being challenged and achievements and all those types of things. And hopefully when you ask a really good, positive, curious question, your interviewer does this. Okay, that's a tough question. They look up and they smile, and what are they doing? They're going deep into the back of the brain to pull out those positive experiences. Yeah. And then, you know, what you are doing as a candidate is you're connecting yourself and your interviewer with those positive experiences. You know, I mean, it's not rocket science, but there is a bit of psychology to it in terms of how you go and do it. The other thing I will say to you very specifically for your audience is that the number one attribute that hiring managers, recruiters, HR teams, and all that type of stuff are looking for in people who are in, you know, BA, automation, you know, tech, dev, engineering types of roles. The absolutely number one attribute that they are looking for is curiosity.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can only display curiosity by asking questions.
Right. So it's really the key part of the interview then.
If you don't get any questions out in your interview, you're goosed.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're goosed against the curiosity metric from a scoring perspective.
Or you're missing a big opportunity anyway, for sure.
100%. So like, again, Jack has emphasized that. I'm doubling down on that. Like this, the question component of your interview, the quality of your questions, like they need to be exceptional.
Very good. And just to reiterate what you said there for the viewers there, so they need to be positive and they need to be curious as well. And we had some great examples there. So that's brilliant. So by the way, just if on the subject of questions, if anyone does have any questions who's watching, I know we had some from Alexander earlier. Now is your chance to write them in, because we have one more topic to go, and then would be your last chance before we wrapping up. So we'll just move on to the topic, which would be really about interview prep. So you've got your CV out there, you've planned it. So how do you prep for an interview and plan it? Maybe when you know you've got one coming up. That was the topic here. So yeah, it was what to expect as well, and interview preparation was the final topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think from what Rob mentioned at the top of the webinar there, with regards to it being a full process from beginning to end, where you apply for a role, you produce your cover letter, you've done your due diligence into the company and the hiring manager, which is vital. And now you've got the opportunity to interview. So that interview likely will only last, well, depends on the stage of the process you're in, but let's say it's a first stage interview and you're having to sell yourself. That interview prep, just make sure you spend the evening before, a couple of days beforehand, ideally, just doing a bit of research into, as I say, the team. It could be their responses on Glassdoor, so you can get an idea for the culture, the hiring manager and that person's background. It's always really important to get an idea around who the person is that is going to be interviewing you and what their background is and what their role is within the business. Ideally, if you're in a position where you're working with a recruiter, it could be with Ingenio, you know, the team and I here, we would allocate specific time, 45 minutes, where we'll do a Zoom with the candidate prior to their interview, and we'll ensure we go through everything around prep that's important for that particular candidate and that role. And there's an opportunity there for the candidate to learn as much as they can about the role, the business, the types of interview questions that interviewer likes to pose, and how to tackle some of those questions. But, you know, don't be too phased. The interview is the opportunity for you to sell yourself as a candidate. So as long as you do your homework and a bit of research, and you put the time and effort in, then the interview itself should go, you know, naturally quite well. And so I would just make sure that you allocate enough time prior to the interview to tick off the key things that you need to know in terms of who's interviewing you, who's on the panel, and everything else. Now, look, you can get into a final stage interview process where there's a big presentation that you have to deliver, and that's a different story altogether. But in those types of interviews, you know, ideally that would be a 3rd or a 4th stage interview, most likely. And it's really important at that point that you are putting a lot of time and effort into it to ensure that your presentation is on point. In an ideal world, you'd be presenting that presentation to the recruiter 48 hours before the actual interview, just so you can, you know, you can run through it with the recruiter. And if there's anything that needs to be amended or changed, there's enough time there to do so. And you're getting that.
Or Jack, someone, maybe they're not working with a recruiter, but like deliver it to someone so that you're physically saying it out loud.
Yeah, so it's not the first time you're doing it in the moment.
Yeah. It's so important, and I'd highly recommend that. And you know, if it's not the recruiter, it can just be somebody, as I say, within the household or one of your ex-peers, for instance. And yeah, I'd go through it with them and just make sure that everything's on point for that final opportunity to sell yourself, and make sure that the panel go away thinking, right, blimey, that candidate really did put a lot of time and effort into that presentation. And so, you know, you've done your very best then, and hopefully it will lead to a successful offer for the candidate.
Yeah. I think the couple of bits for me, just to finish off, Luke, I'm conscious of your time. If you can, right? Well, like, sorry, please speak to someone. So pick up the phone and speak to someone. And you know, whether that's like the utopia is someone who's just got hired by that business.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So if you can, and listen, LinkedIn is a great tool. It's free, right? So you can find, you know, someone who just got hired in Ingenio in the last 3 months. And guess what you can do? It doesn't cost you any money. Connect with that individual, get them to, you know, wait for their acceptance, and write them a message and say, is there any chance that you might give me 5 minutes to help me? I know you've just had success going down this road, getting hired by these guys. I've got my interview with Jack Matthews tomorrow, and I'd love to pick your brains in terms of how you got through. Now, look, people love to help people, right? So if you can have a conversation with someone, that is utopia. But you know, maybe someone else who works there, someone else who can maybe give you a steer in terms of culture and process and all that type of stuff. Maybe someone who worked with the hiring manager in a previous life, who's maybe in a different role or a different company. So little things like that really, really help. Jack's given a kind of a load of nuggets there, you know, on that sort of things. The last thing for me, aside from obviously sharing your interview or your presentation, right? If you don't have that luxury, make sure on your phone that you record yourself talking about you as you're going to be doing in the interview. Because guess what the very first or second question is going to be? It's going to be, hey, Luke, tell me about yourself. And you have to go and answer that question. So, you know, telling the Rob Magee story, or you know, whoever it is, you know, whoever you are, like, that needs to blow someone away. Okay. So record yourself telling that story, and make sure, you know, again, if you're in Zoom, people, you don't need to be a salesperson or anything else like that, but it's really, really important.
Brilliant. Well, that's some great advice there. So look, I'll just check. We don't have any questions coming through. We had that one from a couple from Alexander. So look, I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us. And I'm saying we're delighted to have partnered with Ingenio. They're one of our HR partners. By the way, if anyone's watching and they wanted to get in touch with you, maybe they're watching the recording and they have a question they couldn't ask us live, and you know, they want to pop an email, or even if they want to find you and check out what roles you've got, how would they get in touch with you?
So I've just dropped a link. I've just dropped a couple of links into the chat. So look, you know, our recruitment business is Ingenio-Global. And our learning business and coaching business is Ingenio-Learning.
.com, is it?
Both.com. Both.com, obviously. Yeah, exactly. So, listen, we'd be delighted to speak to people, help people, you know, and very clearly, you know, Jack is the guy to go and speak to. He's the holder of dev, technical and engineering roles right across Ireland and the UK right now. So, very definitely a guy worth reaching out to.
Yeah,
Great,
and likewise, I've just added my my LinkedIn link URL there. So if anybody did want to connect and had some questions for me, then feel free to click on that link, and I'll happily accept, and we can take it from there.
Great, and obviously, and Ingenio is. Are you guys on Twitter as well? You're on Facebook. You're on all the channels as well. If people are looking for you. Great. All right.
We are indeed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anyway, and also we're at Dublin Coding School, so we're on Dublin Coding, dublincoding.ie, and you can get me, Luke, at dublincoding.ie if you had any follow-up questions or want to know about our courses, which, as we said, are in full stack web development, automation testing, which can be using Selenium, Cypress, or even .NET C#, and also UX UI design and cybersecurity and data analytics, a very popular course. So look, thank you very much, guys. I'd maybe like to say thanks again for joining us, Rob and also Jack, and say goodbye to everyone at home. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Luke. Absolute pleasure. See you soon.
Have a good one, folks. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.